We should have listened to the locals. The warnings were clear enough, but we laughed them off, too cocky for our own good. "There's something out there," they said. "Something that watches. Something that waits." We figured it was just the usual small-town legends. Every remote area has its share of spooky stories, right? My friends, Alex, Leah, and Sarah, and I had been camping in remote areas for years. This time, we chose a secluded spot deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town, where the trees stood tall like ancient guardians, and the forest floor was blanketed with leaves so thick they muffled your footsteps. The first day went by smoothly. We hiked, set up camp, and spent the evening laughing around the campfire. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the forest grew darker, something changed. The air grew colder, stiller. The fire crackled and popped, but it didn't seem to warm us anymore. "I don't like this," Leah said, her eyes scanning the surrounding trees. "It feels like we're being watched." Alex chuckled, tossing another log onto the fire. "Come on, don't tell me you're buying into that local folklore." But I felt it too, an uneasy sensation crawling up my spine, as though unseen eyes were boring into the back of my skull. I turned, scanning the tree line, but there was nothing. Just the darkness, thick and impenetrable. Still, we brushed it off, chalking it up to nerves. We had all been a little jumpy after the long hike. As the night wore on, the fire burned lower, and one by one, we retreated to our tents. That's when the noises started. At first, it was just the sound of branches snapping somewhere in the distance. It wasn't unusual for animals to wander through the woods at night, so I tried to ignore it. But the snapping grew louder, closer. It sounded less like an animal, more like footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching through the leaves. I sat up, straining to hear over the sound of my own heartbeat. My tent rustled in the breeze, but otherwise, everything was silent. Too silent. I poked my head out, the cool night air chilling my skin. Across the campfire, Leah and Sarah were still fast asleep, their tents undisturbed. Alex's tent, however, was empty. "Alex?" I whispered, my voice barely louder than the wind. No answer. I climbed out of my tent and walked toward the tree line, squinting into the darkness. "Alex?" I called again, louder this time. That's when I saw it, movement in the shadows. Just beyond the reach of the firelight, something was there. It was hard to make out, but it was tall. Taller than any human should be. My heart pounded as I stepped closer, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. I opened my mouth to call out again, but before I could speak, a loud crack echoed through the forest. The figure darted deeper into the woods, moving faster than should have been possible. I ran back to camp, shaking Leah and Sarah awake. "Alex is gone," I said, my voice trembling. "And there's something out there. Something big." They didn't waste time questioning me. We grabbed flashlights and followed the trail into the woods, our hearts racing with fear and adrenaline. The deeper we went, the darker it became, the trees looming over us like silent sentinels. Then we found Alex's backpack, discarded on the ground, torn open as if by claws. "What the hell?" Leah muttered, her flashlight trembling in her hand. Before we could react, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. It was Alex's voice, but it was cut short, abruptly silenced. We froze, too terrified to move. And that's when we heard it, the sound of heavy breathing, coming from the trees around us. We never saw what it was. We didn't wait to find out. We ran, faster than I've ever run in my life, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about the noise we made. Whatever it was behind us, its footsteps thundering in the darkness. We didn't stop running until we reached the road, our lungs burning, our legs shaking. We collapsed, gasping for breath, but Alex, He was never found. We never went back to those woods. None of us talk about it anymore. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls through the trees, I swear I can still hear that breathing. And I know it's still out there. We were miles from any help, with no cell service and no way to call for Alex. The road felt impossibly far away as we stood there, gasping for breath in the suffocating darkness. Leah was on the verge of panic, her breaths coming in quick, shallow bursts. "We have to go back for him," she said, but I could hear the fear in her voice. None of us wanted to admit it, but we all knew whatever was out there wasn't human, and Alex was likely already gone. Despite the terror gripping my chest, I shook my head. We can't. Not without more light, not without some sort of plan. But deep down, I knew there was no plan that could save us from whatever had taken Alex. We were in its territory now, and it had the upper hand. Just then, the rustling came again, closer this time, surrounding us like a thick, living blanket. Leah's flashlight beam darted wildly from tree to tree, illuminating nothing but shadows. Sarah, usually the calmest of us, was frozen in place, staring wide-eyed into the forest as though she could see something none of us could. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. The oppressive silence returned, and we stood there, caught between fear and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, it was over. But that hope was short-lived. From the depths of the forest came a low, guttural growl. A sound so primal and filled with malice that it sent an icy wave of dread through every inch of my body. Whatever was out there, it wasn't done with us yet. Leah's flashlight flickered, then died, plunging us further into darkness. "No, no, no," she whispered, frantically shaking it as if sheer willpower could bring it back to life. Sarah grabbed my arm, her grip so tight it hurt. "We have to go," she said, her voice barely audible, trembling with fear. The growl came again, this time closer, more insistent, as if it was warning us that we were running out of time. "We need to stick together," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though panic clawed at my throat. "Just move." Slowly. Toward the road. My heart hammered as we took cautious steps, every crack of a twig beneath our feet sending jolts of terror through me. The trees seemed to close in, their gnarled branches reaching out like claws. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever, as though 1,000 unseen eyes were fixed on us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As we walked, I became aware of another sound, something beyond the growls, something fainter. It was almost like whispering. Voices, carried on the wind, murmuring just beyond our understanding. Leah stopped dead in her tracks. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. We all heard it, though none of us could make out what the voices were saying. They were faint, but they were growing louder, swirling around us in the oppressive darkness. Suddenly, from somewhere deep in the woods, we heard Alex's voice. "Help me," he screamed, his voice raw with fear and pain. Without thinking, Leah broke into a sprint toward the sound, her fear for Alex overriding all reason. "No, Leah, wait!" I yelled, but it was too late. She disappeared into the trees before I could stop her. Sarah and I stood frozen, too terrified to move, knowing that whatever had taken Alex was luring us deeper into the darkness. And we were falling right into its trap. Sarah and I exchanged a look of sheer panic. We couldn't leave Leah out there alone, but every instinct screamed at me to run the opposite direction. My legs felt heavy, paralyzed with fear. "We have to get her," Sarah whispered, though I could hear the doubt in her voice. Nodding, I steeled myself and started after Leah, the whispering voices now a deafening cacophony all around us. Every step felt wrong, like we were walking straight into the jaws of something ancient and malevolent. The trees grew denser, the air colder, and the oppressive weight of the forest pressed down on us with every breath. Suddenly, there was a sharp scream, Leah's voice, full of terror and pain. Then, Silence. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. Sarah was sobbing quietly, her flashlight shaking in her hand. We were too late. Leah was gone. A shadow moved in the distance, too fast for my eyes to track, and I felt that horrible, familiar presence watching us once again. We need to get out of here, I whispered, my voice barely holding together. With every ounce of willpower, we turned and ran, knowing that whatever was in those woods wasn't done with us yet.